Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We are with Impulse Storm, our level 22 brute, and we are on the Magic Man story arc for Mercedes. And so yeah, this character is doing really well. We now have a full set of single origin enhancers on the character, even on our pool powers. So it's looking really good. We got a bunch of these in the last story arc that we need to sell at some point, but we are on the Magic Man mission, part 2, so we will do that first. And as we go, as you know, this series is Scrapperlock plays City of Heroes and Rants. So we're going to do a rant. By the way, you might want to wonder why do I always like turn around and get on top of the train station. It's just to get altitude, especially at this level when the super jump isn't quite as powerful as it is later. I just try to get altitude so that I can stay up, because you want to be up in super jump, because once you go down it's really hard to get back up if you want to get up onto a really tall building, right? So like there we had no choice, and then we end up down in the street, and we're going down for a mission down below, but if you happen to need to go up for some reason, it's just easier once you get up to just stay up than it is to get up in the first place. Okay, so rant time. So I was watching the 41st, I think it was, live stream of Luke Hart on the DM lair. And, if you want to watch, you can. We're being ambushed right away, huh? Well, you guys are going to get pounded. Family, you have no chance against me because I have smashing and lethal resistance. So in this stream, one of the first questions that was asked was about a DM who is seemingly, I don't know what the word is for it, like aggressive toward the characters. And so what this player said is, what do I do about a DM who is always trying to TPK the party? That means a total party kill, that is wipe the party, right? And he keeps attacking the player characters. That was the complaint. So Luke sort of took the first part as the question. That is, the DM is being mean to us and trying to wipe the party. But here's the issue with the way that question was worded, right? And it's actually really revealing and important to ask, like, how are people wording the things that they're asking? Because it's really hard to know what's happening. As Matt Colville said in his stream, he can't audit your game, right, to see what's going on, right? So he can only take what you're saying at face value and assume that you're accurately representing things. So let's think about what this player said. He said that the DM is A, trying to wipe the party all the time, and B, he keeps attacking the player characters. He keeps attacking us. Well, this suggests to me that this is a player who maybe doesn't understand how the game works. Because, I mean, it's kind of the DM's job to create creatures that are going to attack the player characters, right? Not the players themselves, right? The guys at the table, but the characters, right? You build a lair of orcs. Everything in that lair is going to attack, is supposed to attack the player characters, right? So if this person is actually upset that all of the hostile enemies are actually hostile and are making melee attacks and ranged attacks and spell attacks against the player characters, then I have to question the entire premise of the complaint. Right? Because you're supposed to do that as a DM. You make orcs and goblins and hobgoblins, and they're in a lair, and they attack player characters when they come in. After all, we're 23. I didn't even realize we were that close. These things are all attacking us, right? Are the computer programmers of City of Heroes mean because they programmed the family to attack anybody who walks in here? That's what's supposed to happen. I'm playing this game to fight supervillains. You can't have a fight if they don't attack. So I like the whole premise of the question. I'm not sure about it because it's not the DM's job to keep trying to TPK the party. But it sounds like this player is getting upset because the DM is playing the monsters like they want to win, right? Because though the DM might not want to wipe the party, the monsters do, right? And although the programmers who built City of Heroes didn't necessarily want me to faceplant in this mission, oh, I forgot to level up. Let's see if we can interrupt this. Okay. The family NPCs, if they had any, mental capacity, certainly would be trying to faceplant me, and they're supposed to behave as if they're trying to faceplant you, right? We don't need any of that. So quick recovery. I think I want to. Do we want to do that, or do we want to put resistance on here? I think we want to get this finished as quickly as possible for our endurance. And let's do another recharge on Power Siphon. And I think I've actually got a recharge here, right? And that will cut the recharge time down to 1 minute and 9 seconds. We don't have any endurance recovery. I'm not going to buy any more. We're already level 23, so I only buy them right at the breakpoints. And once we get to level 27, we'll use the extra, what's the word for it? Inventions, the IOs. Now we can use our mission teleporter. So the DM is not trying to TPK the party, but the monsters are. When my player characters attacked a blue dragon in ancient Egypt in our Roman campaign, which they did about a month ago, that dragon was trying to kill the party. Now, I didn't want the dragon to kill the party, but I was supposed to be playing it as if it did, and it did everything it could to try and kill them. That's how this is supposed to work, and that's what makes it a challenge. And I don't know. He keeps attacking the player characters with the monsters, right? I mean, that's what he's supposed to do. And if you're going to get upset that you're being attacked, I'm not sure I can believe you about the GM, quote-unquote, always trying to TPK the party, because it sounds like you're taking all of this a little bit too personally, and you're being a little too fragile. I got shades of the really annoying player that used to play with us, and every time you had a supervillain turn to his character, who was one of 4 or 5 PCs on the board, so he should have been attacked, every 20 or 30% of the time, right? If you said the villain's going to attack Nucleon, who is his character, or Propulsion, or Brainstorm, those are his main characters, he would argue with you and say, but why are you attacking me? Why don't you attack Stuart's character? Why don't you attack Justin's character? Why don't you attack Greg's character? They did more damage than I did. No, I'm sorry. He has judged you to be the bigger threat, and he is attacking you. Well, fine, let him die. See if I care, he would say, and throw the character sheet across the room. Right? Literally, he never wanted his character to get attacked. He always wanted somebody else to get attacked. He never wanted his character to get attacked. He never wanted his character to take damage. He lied about how much stun and endurance he had on his character sheet, right? Because he thought it was basically unfair that he had to... Wow, we're getting pounded. But we're alright. He thought it was... I can't see anything. God damn it. Sorry. I aggroed more people. Alright, let's just pull out of here for a sec. I got caught in the graphics and I could not see what was going on. Alright, let's see here. That is a huge set of spawns. I don't know how that many of them were that close to each other. You're definitely bringing my fury up, guys. Man, and do they ever miss? See if I can knock them back. And of course, I missed a bunch of them. I I just can't do damage that fast to, like, 8 guys. Jeez. Alright, let's put some defense on. We're going to have to, because they're just hitting me too much. I wonder if the player version of Energy Melee is that accurate. Anyway, so this player basically considered it almost like a personal offense if you dared attack his character. He became enraged. He hated it. Right? He just didn't want anything negative to ever happen to his character. And he pretty much took it personally and acted like you were trying to kill his character. And I see what's happening. We're getting caught by patrols. If you even just rolled to hit, right? It's not like the villain is necessarily going to be able to take you out in one shot. You're just rolling to attack his character, and he would be mad and think it was unjustified. Look how high the Fury bar got with that. And so, yeah, when you have somebody saying the DM is being unfair for attacking us all the time, I find it just not believable, even that the GM's always trying to do a TPK, because it just sounds like somebody who's being too sensitive. And I kind of wish Luke had said, wait a minute, what do you mean the DM keeps attacking you? Isn't that what the DM is supposed to do? The monsters are there to be fought. And when the combat begins, they attack your characters. What do you expect the DM to do? So, folks, don't take it personally when the enemies attack your character. It's what the enemies are supposed to do. It's what the enemies are there to do. It's what you're playing the game for the enemies to do. You're playing the game, presumably, to get into some level of combat and so on. And in the combat, the enemies are going to attack you. You shouldn't get upset by that. You should expect it. It's part of the game. So that's sort of one really interesting comment that was made. And, yeah, I think it's very telling when a player complains that the DM keeps attacking the characters. Right? And, of course, I assume he means not that the DM is personally attacking the characters, but the DM is having the enemies attack characters. I can't imagine it would be any other way. Let's see if we can get some knockback. The second thing in the same stream, the second thing that happened, or that was asked about, was a player said that she was kicked out of a D&D group because the GM said she had her expectations were too high. And then Luke asked for more information. Well, what do you mean by that? And it was apparently a paid GMing experience. She was paying $16. And he said, well, for $16, I don't know how much you can really expect. That's not that much money to prepare a session. If there are 4 or 5 players, he's getting like $80 a session. It's not that much. You do a lot of work as a GM, and he's putting a lot of hours into it, presumably. And you shouldn't have these unrealistic expectations. Now, she then went on to say, it was a homebrew world, in a homebrew game in a homebrew world. She found the world sort of boring and empty. She thought that the GM wasn't really role-playing the NPCs, and that she was kind of bored. But then as we got into, as Luke started asking more questions and she started answering what had happened, right? One of the things that she said was she sent a link to the GM for the YouTube video that Luke has on the DM layer called Lazy DMs or something like that. And I thought, well, okay, this sounds like a pretty, I don't know, passive-aggressive or whatever way of telling your DM, hey, you're lazy. I mean, I'd probably be pretty insulted, too, if one of my players said, here, there's a video you should watch, and the video was about lazy DMs. Like, are you saying I'm lazy? If you think I'm lazy, get out of the campaign. I mean, like, that. Why are you even playing? Now, I don't remember watching that video, so I don't know exactly what the video was about. But I want to address this thing about expectations because, to be honest, I faced it myself. I feel like my best friend was often he acted like he wasn't entirely satisfied with my Rome campaign, despite I did a lot of work on it. Um, but I feel like he always made me feel like he had these really high expectations of me and of what I was going to do, which I have to say, to a certain degree, is a little flattering that he thought I could be that good, right? But I always felt like I was disappointing him because I didn't. I always felt like he always sort of implied that I wasn't living up to his expectations. He didn't say that exactly, but his comments kind of made me feel that way. And to be honest, it was very disheartening to me as a GM. Game masters want and need feedback and criticism, and if we do something that isn't fun, we need to know it. But to constantly feel like each and every session, all the work you put into it just didn't stack up to the expectation of the player, that's just very disheartening. And it makes you not want to keep going because you're like, well, I can't meet his expectations, and I feel like, maybe he'd just have more fun with a different game master, right? I mean, the other players often told me how much fun they were having. He rarely did, and he was mostly saying, why don't you do this, and why don't you do that? You need more background, you need more of this, you need more of that, more magic items, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, I always felt like he had these huge, lofty, impossible to meet expectations, and I never able to meet them. And he was always a little disappointed in the campaign. By the way, I think he also had really high expectations of himself, which is why, as I mentioned in earlier videos, he was trying to like soft reboot his character by having him be aged back to like de-aged back to 14 and then re-aged. I think he had these lofty expectations for himself, and I really feel like it was Critical Role that did this. Like it's not like he hadn't played D&D before, but he hadn't played it in a long time. He watched a lot of Critical Role. He got really into it, and I think he kind of expected the role play to be like what you see on Critical Role. And even though he knew I'm not a voice actor like Matt Mercer, I think he kind of expected me to kind of do the voices and the role playing of NPCs the way Matt Mercer does, and maybe do these beautiful graphic descriptions the way he does of rooms and NPCs, and just make these unbelievably unique and interesting characters as NPCs, like I'm a character actor and doing improv and stuff. And yeah, I mostly did third-party role-playing. He tells you X in like the past tense or whatever, told you X in past tense. I'm role-playing, I'm telling you what he told you, but I'm not saying it in his exact words, and I'm not using his figures of speech. And so, I don't know. He never actually said any of those things specifically, but I always felt sort of haunted in this campaign that I was disappointing my best friend and not living up to his expectations. And that, as I said, that can be a very disheartening thing. And so in a way, I kind of don't blame this DM if the DM was really working hard. I mean, the player seemed to insist that she didn't think he was working hard at all. And maybe he wasn't, and if that's true, then she had every right to expect him to do some work. But if the GM was actually working really hard and trying to create a cool world, and it just wasn't as cool as Exandria or Matt Colville's world or something, and she was disappointed, and he was trying to role-play the NPCs, but he's doing sort of the third-party role-playing, and she wanted voice acting, right? And so she said, well, it's boring because there's no voice acting, and it's not a world as cool and well-developed as Exandria, Wildmount, right? Well, then that DM would be right, that she did have unreasonable expectations. Right? And so, I don't know who's right here because, Luke did say we're only getting one side of the story. But what he said was you're probably well out of that game if you felt like the DM was not working hard enough and you were disappointed in it. You probably should have left, and that DM was probably right to ask you to leave because you're better off without them, right? Like, I mean, maybe he was being rude to ask you to leave. Maybe he was being overly sensitive when you... But, I think saying to a DM, you're a lazy DM, go watch Luke's video about lazy DMing to see what I mean, or like why I'm unhappy. Like how much was this person complaining? Were they complaining all the time? Right? Again, that's no fun for the GM. Yes, we need constructive criticism, but if players are constantly complaining about everything we do, you start to ask yourself, why am I doing it? Right? And again, you have to be careful, because if you make your GM unhappy, there's a very high probability that that GM will say, I don't want to run the game anymore. Oh boy, the Magic Man finale. All right, so we're going to need some defense inspirations. So I'm going to have to go to the hospital for that. And that's just down the road here. I mean, how many times I've said it. I wish more people would listen to my videos. Not that I'm trying to get my, view count up, so per se it's tiny and whatever. I don't really care about that. But I wish the people who are doing the things that make their DMs miserable would listen to this part of my videos at least. That if you make your DM unhappy, you run the risk of the game ending. And I'm going to say it quite frankly and honestly with my best friend, right? And his constant implying that I was not living up to the standard he had in his head, and that I was not living up to his expectations. That was very disheartening to me, and it was frustrating, and it has accelerated the conclusion of my campaign. There are a variety of reasons why I ended my campaign earlier than I intended in the sense of content, right? I never intended to run more than 2.5 years, which is what I've done, but we didn't get, there are should be another 6 or 7 adventures before we end it, and I just found a way to wrap it up early, and it's now about to, in 2 or 3 days, we're about to probably, unless something weird happens, enter the final dungeon, which will take 3 or 4 sessions, 5 sessions to do, and then we're done. And then I fold up my dungeon mastering screen for good, and my best friend, who keeps saying he'd much rather play than DM, is going to be taking over as a DM. And there are a variety of reasons why I did that, but one of them is that his constant, almost like nagging about that he wants more, and he wants me to do more, and so on as a game master, and that I like without saying it, the constant implication that I'm not satisfying him, that I'm not meeting his expectations, is disheartening enough that quite frankly he makes me not want to GM for him. I mean, I love the guy, but because I don't want to keep disappointing him, and I don't want to keep hearing how I disappointed him, so I'd rather just not do it. And let's let him disappoint me for a little bit. There's a big difference, though. I'm never going to tell him that he disappointed me, because I know how disheartening that can be, where you're pouring your heart out into this scenario, or adventure or whatever. As one of my friends said, slaving over a hot scenario, right? You pour your heart out into it, you work really hard, and you present it to the players in good faith, where you're hoping it's going to be fun for them. You're certainly not trying to ruin their day or TPK them or any of that. You're just trying to make a fun, cool adventure. And maybe it bombs, and maybe you didn't do a great job, and you feel like it's not only not appreciated, but they're just, oh, this disappointed me. Well, if that keeps happening, you don't want to run it anymore, right? I don't want to keep disappointing the guy. And so, yeah, it just makes me not want to be the GM anymore. And so, yeah, he was always, there were always these sort of undercurrents of dissatisfaction, and I don't want to say complaints, because he wasn't like whining and complaining, but he was often making comments like, oh, why wouldn't you do this, or can't we do this, or I'd like it if you did this. And that's very disheartening. I mean, for example, he always wants there to be at least 5 players. Maybe 4 is okay, but 3 is not enough. And he was constantly pushing us when we had 3 players active and 1 person who was nominally in the game but never showed up. He kept saying, let's cut that guy loose and get at least one or two more players, and like he was so hot to do that. And finally, when I sort of cornered on him, he said, this is like in text, 3 is boring. 3 players is boring. It's not enough, and it's boring. And I said to him, there have been 3 players like for the whole last however many months, 8, 9 months in our Roman game. Are you saying you've been bored? And he basically said yes. Like, well, that's nice. I've been working my butt off for 8 months, and you're bored. And it wasn't anything I could really do anything about, because what he was bored about wasn't the scenarios I was presenting to them, the adventures. What he was bored about was the fact that there weren't enough player characters to do the player character roleplay interactions with. Again, I think he's thinking about Critical Role, where they have 7 trained actors on the group, and there's a lot of character interaction, and sometimes the GM just sits there for 45 minutes watching, doesn't do anything, while the players have their own story that they're doing. Their interactions, one of them is arguing with another, or they're flirting, or whatever it happens to be. And it's like, well, yeah, when you have 7 trained actors, you're going to get a lot of party interactions, and way more than when you have 3 regular role players, one of whom's a newbie, right? But the rest of the adventure can still be fun. You don't have to have those interactions. You can have more combat or something, and that can be fun too. So I'm like, I'm working my butt off for this, and you're telling me that no matter what I do, you're bored because there aren't enough players in the game? That was very, again, that was very disheartening to hear. And, then he got annoyed when I said, look, I don't want to add any more new books, any more new rules to the game. We're dancing with the rule book that brung us, and what we have now, Tasha's and earlier, is what's in the rules and not anymore. And he complained about that and said, well, what's fun for me is to add more new stuff and more options and more cool gameplay mechanisms that weren't in the game before, and I really like that. And he wasn't happy with that. And so it was like, lots of the decisions I made, he didn't like and disagreed with, and he wouldn't have made that decision if he was the DM. And so there's backseat DMing, there's a sort of the constant sense that I'm disappointing him. And this really was, like I said, very disheartening, very discouraging. And it made me, where are we going here? It made me not want to DM. And so this is my point, guys, about making the DM so unhappy that they decide they want to quit. Right? Now, I didn't just say I'm done, but it definitely made me want to wrap things up. Now, again, it's not the only thing, but I honestly think if it weren't for that I would probably at least be planning to finish the end of the year GMing, and maybe really finish the entire story that I had originally planned. Magic Man is over there. Okay. So, yeah, he made me kind of discouraged enough that I decided I'd rather not run. Like, it'd be easier for me to just let somebody else GM and not run. I do like that AoE KB. That is very helpful for mob control. That's what happens, right? Unhappy GM, end of game. And, again, I didn't just say I'm done right now. I didn't take my ball and go home. But I did decide it's time for me to start trying to wrap things up, because I really don't feel like being constantly having the sense that I'm disappointing my best friend, that I'm always failing to meet his very high expectations. Again, There's a certain degree to which I'm flattered that he thinks that I could do what Matt Mercer can do, or Matt Colville, or Jordan Caves Callerman. I'm flattered that he would think I can do that, especially since he's played under me before and he ought to know damn well that I can't. And I appreciate the fact that he's got enough faith in me that he actually thought that I could pull off whatever lofty expectations he had in his brain for our campaign, right? But it's also very discouraging and disheartening when you're working as hard as I did to make a good game out of my D&D campaign, only to find out that one of the players is just always disappointed and feels like your adventures don't meet the expectations he had. So now we have to try to pound this guy really quickly because, or not, maybe not this guy, the next guy, I think. So the way this works, a little bit of spoiler, but after you beat him, he comes back, and then after you beat him again, like 2 of them come back, so I think you have to beat like 4 of them. Yep, here comes one. You can see the voice coming. There he is. So let's pound him. So here's my advice, guys. When you're playing in a game, it's okay to provide constructive criticism to the game master, and you should do it. And if the game master is doing stuff that you hate, you should warn him, right? He doesn't want to make you miserable. He really doesn't, or she. But if you're going to constantly tell the GM that they're not living up to your expectations, if you're going to constantly tell the GM that, you know, that they're not good enough, if you're going to point the GM to videos that imply they're lazy, you should be prepared for the fact that that GM might not want to play with you anymore. Right? Because it does not feel pleasant as a game master to do all that work only to discover that the players don't even appreciate it and don't even like it. Okay? So, give your game masters a break. If they've been working really hard for you, you should acknowledge and appreciate it. And, yep, here we go again. You should acknowledge and appreciate it and not take it for granted, and certainly not criticize it. Right? There's constructive criticism, and then there's just having unreasonable expectations. And again, I have to tell you that as a GM, having a player constantly have these big, lofty expectations, and then you never meet them, you just can't meet them, and they keep letting you know that you didn't meet them, that's really not fun for the GM. And it definitely makes me not want to be a GM. Right? So there was no way that I would have ever said I'd be willing to run any more D&D after this campaign is over, no matter how much the rest of the group wanted me to. Now, I might have been willing to run a different game, because I think in a different game that my friend doesn't know that well, maybe he would have different expectations, right? He wouldn't have the types of expectations he had from a D&D game. He wouldn't constantly be second-guessing my rulings because he doesn't even know how this game plays, whether it's Call of Cthulhu or Lion and Dragon or Savage Worlds or something like that. Maybe he would have been better in a different game. But the problem is, in D&D, he knows it really well, and so it's really easy for him to second-guess, to think how he would DM it. And he's constantly watching streams of D&D, not these other games. So there's, also, what's this? Okay, we're not going to do Crown of Glory yet. There's also, what was I talking about? I was reading the mission and I forgot. what I was talking about. Um, but yeah, it's not fun to work your heart out and find out you only just disappointed people. And um, if you do that, if you make your GM feel that way, and especially if you aggressively say things like "Watch this lazy DM video, you're a lazy DM because you're not meeting my expectations," you should expect either to be kicked out of the game or more than likely, because most DMs aren't going to kick you out of the game for that, you should expect them to just be like, okay, I don't want to DM anymore. And then if you don't DM and nobody else in your group DMs, your group is over. Your campaign is over. My campaign is ending in part because my friend not only had unreasonable expectations, but he kept letting me know that I was not meeting them. It's not fair to expect your game master to run the game like one of these guys on these shows. And I think that's what I was saying. He watches a D&D show, so he's got that game as his calibration, right? But since he's never watched Savage Worlds or Call of Cthulhu, maybe he wouldn't have the same kinds of really high expectations of those games because he doesn't really know how they're played. I don't know. Knowing my best friend, if we started playing Savage Worlds, he'd go out and start watching some of the streams so he could see how the game is played, and then he would have too high of an expectation for that too if he's watching Jordan Callerman. And again, I think he's equal opportunity. He had very high expectations of himself, both as a player and as a DM, and he wasn't happy with the way his Candlekeep campaign came out. He told me that. He made a lot of mistakes, he said. And so I don't really think that campaign came out the way he wanted it to either. I think he had very high expectations for that campaign. One of the expectations he had was that we were going to add this one guy who we invited into our campaign. I've mentioned this before, and he said he wasn't interested in the way I was running the Roman campaign. So then when we did Candlekeep, my best friend invited him, and his hope was that after the guy played with us a while, he'd realize this is a cool group of fun people, and who cares whether the campaign setting of Rome is for me or not. I still want to keep playing with these same interesting people. And and I know he was hoping to woo this guy to play in the Rome game so that he could have his almighty fifth player. And he was super disappointed. It didn't meet his expectations when the guy said no. And I think his whole campaign was designed to attract this guy. And he would probably tell you, I feel like I didn't do enough to attract him. His own campaign doesn't meet his expectations. So he's not an unfair guy. But I constantly felt like I had a certain amount of pressure on me to meet this guy's expectations every other week when we played. And like I never actually met them. And so that's not a pleasant way to feel. And I realized on a certain level that the only way not to feel that way would be not to GM, because even he disappoints himself. Even he doesn't live up to his own expectations. So how could I ever? So guys, don't have unreasonable expectations. Don't expect your GM to be Matt Koval or Matt Mercer or Jordan Caves Callerman. Your GM is who he is. He's doing the best he can do most of the time. If you've got an obnoxious GM who thinks it's DM against players, there are always exceptions, but 99% of the time, the game master is just trying to make a good, enjoyable experience for the players. And if it falls short, it's not for lack of trying, and it's not for lack of effort, and it's not because he wanted it to fall short. He tried some new idea, new experience, skill challenge, whatever. It bombed. Well, he was hoping it would be good. The live streams all used it and it looked good. Matt Colville recommended it, blah, blah, blah. So he's trying it. He's trying to make it fun. Always give your GM the benefit of the doubt. Assume he's trying to make it fun. Assume he's doing work unless you have blatant evidence to the contrary. And don't expect your DM to run a game like Jordan Caves Callerman or Matt Mercer. I think we'll stop there, guys. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.